What happened when you died?
I took my drive one step too far, and it all became all about money. And I could see that happening. I was getting an opportunity to go to San Mateo, California, Memphis, Tennessee, Houston, and ended up going back to Washington, D.C. to work. Well, because it was all about money, it, as you well know, in the business world, you step on a lot of people. In order to get that next promotion, you have to be just a little bit better than the other people that are interviewing. And so as I progressed and money started coming in, I started valuing material items. And material items became very important to me. Even though I had a family, I was gone 3 out of 4 weeks out of the month because I was striving for that almighty dollar. And I had made a goal when I was about 26 years old that by the time I was 32, I was going to be retiring and I was going to be a millionaire. And I was right on track. I hit 28 years old and I was in heaven because of the opportunities that were coming my way. Well, after being out of town for actually 5 weeks that time, I was in a little town called Jackpot, Nevada. And I was out there on an assignment to do some work for the post office and decided to come back for Christmas of all things and came back. We had a great Christmas, and because of my selfishness, I called a friend of mine and we were going to go skiing. I grew up on the ski slopes. I love to ski. There's nothing like fresh powder. And called him and we went up to Park City. And Parks, if you've never been to Park City, it is a beautiful, beautiful community. Well, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a lady coming down the hill, and I couldn't tell if she was going to be able to stop or not because her poles were going every which way. And before I knew it, she had run into us and knocked us all over. And there, it was kind of like a bowling ball coming down and knocking over the pins. We just all fell on the ground and we picked her up and we wiped her off and sent her on her way, not thinking anything more about it. And we, I ended up skiing the rest of the day. My friend and I had a ball. And at the end of the day, we were probably one of the last ones on the hill because I wasn't able to get to ski very much because of the job that I had. Well, we got down to the car and I started taking off my shoes and I started putting my skis away and I took my left glove off. I took my right glove off. And when I lifted up my right hand, I noticed that my thumb was hanging down here and my fingers were going up. And I thought, this doesn't look right. Well, what had happened is when the young lady came down and ran into it, she totally pulled my thumb completely out of joint. And the only thing that was holding my thumb together was the skin. And the guy that was with me was kind of funny because he's an EMT and he did that on the side. And he says, I can't fix this one with a Band-Aid. He says, we got to get something done with this one. So at the time, the equipment wasn't like it is today. Well, because I could not do anything about it at the time, we went up to the ski resort and called my wife, who was down in Provo, and there's a hospital in Provo. And she made all the arrangements for me to come down and be ready for surgery when I got down there. Well, as we started making our way down the mountain and the car started to heat up, I realized that my thumb was hurting a lot. And when we pulled into the hospital, everything was all set up. Now you have to realize too that even though I was married and had 3 kids, I was a very selfish person. Something that I never grew up with in my life was telling my wife that I loved her. I never told my kids that I loved them. The main thing, focus that I had was making money. And so, and they had accepted that, and my wife took the role and basically was raising our 3 kids while I was out making money. Well, when we pulled into the hospital and they took me in the room where they prepped me, they laid me on the table and started to run me back into the operating room, and my wife was walking in beside me. And I'll never forget this because I never told her I loved her. I never thanked her for setting everything up. I didn't tell her that I loved our kids and to give them a big hug from me. I never told her that. All I did is said, I'll see you when I get back. And that thing is been with me for over 40 years since that happened. Well, what they did is they took me into the operating room and they were getting ready to prep me for the operating table. And the anesthesiologist was pulled away on another emergency. But because the doctor was confident in his abilities to fix my thumb, he says, we'll just do a local on it. And what they did is a bear block in it. If you've never heard of a bear block, it's spelled B-E-I-R. And what they do is they put a tourniquet on your right arm, and it has 2 valves on it. And the tourniquet is actually air inside of the tourniquet. Well, the nurse that was in there had never done this procedure before. And the doctor was confident that he could talk her through it, and she was confident that he would be able to talk her through it. Well, what they do is they put a sheet between me and to where they're operating on, so I could hear everything that they were doing, but I couldn't see what they were doing. They kept asking me how I was doing. I said I was doing great. I can't wait to get out of here, and so forth. Well, as the operation was going on, the pressure came on again. And in this case, what you're supposed to do is tighten up the first valve and then loosen the second valve. Well, the nurse, what she did is she opened up the second valve first and didn't close the first valve. And so what happened is the lidocaine came up my arm, across my chest, into my heart. And the next thing I knew is I was raising out of my body and I was standing up above watching the operation. It was the most unbelievable feeling that I have ever had, because standing there, I felt no pain, uh, zero pain. And what I was doing is I was observing what the doctor was doing in finishing his surgery on my thumb. And I took a glance over at the machine, and the monitor flatlined. And when that flatlined, the nurse that was helping the doctor went running out of the room saying that she had killed me. And at that time, there was an emergency team that came in and started working on me. And I was able to watch all this. And I remember so specifically how the utensils were all lined up in a row, and how particular the doctor was in finishing the surgery on my thumb. And he was doing that as they were putting shocking machines on my chest and monitors, and they were running tubes in me and trying to revive me. Well, I wasn't alone. I was standing there, and all of a sudden I felt someone right beside me. And I wasn't allowed to look at him, but what they were doing is they were talking to me through my mind. But yet I could hear everything that was happening in the room audibly. I could hear them frantically, shocking me and trying to bring me back as the doctor was continuing on with the surgery. And we were both so impressed, standing there watching this happen. And through our minds, we were saying how hard they were working on that person down there to bring him back. And then it hit me. I looked at the person on the table, and I actually didn't even recognize me laying on the table. It was just a person that was laying there. And finally it hit me that that was me. And I tried to look at the person next to me, but I wasn't allowed to look at him. Uh, and I went, what's he doing down there? Why doesn't he get up? And, and then it hit me that it was me and that I was actually dead. And then I watched him put a pin in my thumb. And I can remember so specifically the pin stuck out through the skin. And he was so particular that it was protruding through the skin. And he pulled it back out and trimmed it down so it would not protrude through the skin. And I remember so many specifics of what happened. And then the time came that the person next to me said, it's time to go. And where I was going, I had no idea, but it was not my choice. But one thing I want you to know is while standing there, everything was so peaceful. It was the most peaceful feeling that I've ever experienced in my life. And it was a love that was an unconditional love. It's so hard to explain because in growing up, I never felt love. I never expressed love to my wife other than obviously we had 3 kids, but I never knew what it was like to really feel love or to be loved. The next thing I knew, there was a little stretch of light between where I was going to where I ended up standing. And where I was standing was in a field. It was the most beautiful field that I had ever experienced. In front of me and to the right was grass up to my waist. To the far left of me was tall trees, and in between the trees and where I was standing was field of flowers, the most beautiful flowers that I had ever seen, colors that I had never seen before. And I studied them, and they were up to about my waist. And one thing I noticed was all of the flowers were facing towards me. I thought, well, this is unusual. Uh, Although the leaves were facing towards me. And when I would move, they would move with me. And it was almost like every one of those flowers had a soul. And I felt like there was energy that came from every one of those flowers into my body as if they were sharing love with me. And it was unconditional love. I I had to I couldn't help but notice love that I'd never felt before. In front of me and to the right was tall grass, and it was the most unusual looking grass. These were strands, individual strands, and the bottom parts were green coming up on the stem, but the tips were gold. And every one of these blades of grass were facing towards me. Again, sharing energy that I had never felt before. Now, in front of me, and I need to describe how the layout was. It was a panoramic type view. I could see a long ways to the left. I could see a long ways to the right. And the clouds that were in front of me were brilliant. And the sky that was behind the clouds was an iridescent blue, which is a blue that was just magnificent. Now, the 2 clouds on the sides were a pure white. They were brilliant. The one in the middle was more of a pearl color. And the best way to describe it is if you've ever seen one of the newer model cars and you look at it, sometimes there's a blue, sometimes there's a black, sometimes there's a purple. Well, it was the most brilliant cloud that I'd ever seen. And while standing there, my escort or my guardian angel was still with me. Now, when I was down, I know this is probably irrelevant, but when I was standing over the table, he was on my right side. When I was up standing in the field, he was on my left side. And again, he was just out of view, but I could hear his voice through my mind. We didn't talk like we're talking. Everything was done through the mind. And then he said to me, he said that I was never to ever be able to look back again. Don't look back. And it was so very evident what he said. And being where I was at, I was there to obey. Time was not even in the picture. I think if I had wanted to, I could have stayed there for a long, long time. And again, I really don't know how long I was there because there was no clock. It was the most peaceful feeling. And again, I have to reemphasize unconditional love because that's what I felt. Then something happened that just about blew the socks off me. Was I noticed the person that was with me wasn't there anymore. And in most situations you would get anxiety because all of a sudden you're alone. I did not feel that. I felt total peace. Then what happened was I had a review of my life. And what a review that was, because, most people think of looking at a review as up on a picture screen, just watching yourself. Well, mine was in my mind and I lived it. And what happened was I lived every emotion of everybody that I was in contact with throughout my life. I did not see any of my cars that I'd acquired. I didn't see any of my toys. I did not see any of my money. But what I did experience is how I treated other people. Lori, that was very hard on me. But I was not being ridiculed for what I did. What I was being taught was how I should have done it, or how I could have done it, or how I could have made that situation better. I heard a lot of people along the way, and I felt their emotions. And, the people that I was stepping on may have had a death in the family, and they were experiencing pain and anxiety because of that. Or one of their kids were sick that day, and they were feeling, what their kids were feeling. Well, I felt that same thing in each one of the people that I came in contact with. Now, some things were good, some things were not so good. But what I was there to learn. And it was so peaceful, the learning process that I was going through. I watched all the way from the very beginning where I was laying on my mother's chest and how happy she was to bring me into the world. And I was the oldest in the family, so it was very happy day for her to have a child, all the way until I was 28 years old. I experienced it all. I saw me playing sports. I saw how much time my parents put into my sports, how they actually struggled to keep me in my sports, but I was able to excel because of the time and effort that they put into me. I learned a lot from that. It was something that I had to learn. It was not an easy process. Everything was done black and white, right or wrong. There was no fence. There was nobody there to explain, well, this is why I did it, or it was what it was. And when I was through with that, I accepted it because I knew I did it. And what a learning experience that was, but a very peaceful learning experience. And when I got through, I went, okay, I did it. What's next? You know, and through my mind, I was told to walk forward to the cloud. And the most unusual thing happened was when I started walking to the cloud, the flowers followed me, the grass followed me, and it was as if the grass and the flowers were pushing me towards the cloud. It was the most peaceful, calming feeling that you could ever imagine. Now, behind these clouds, there became rays of light that came from on the outside and blended in with that iridescent blue is just incredible because the rays came to me as if to pull me towards the cloud, but the flowers and the grass were pushing me. And it was the most peaceful feeling that I was never ever accustomed to having or feeling. Well, when I got up to the cloud, an arm came through the cloud, and it was just this much of the arm came up, and the hand was like this. And I remember because the thumb was extended and the fingers were together. And, I didn't think anything of, what that meant, or I just thought, well, he was welcoming me wherever I was going next. Because at the time I was not very religious. Wasn't part of it wasn't part of me because it was all about money. Well, I had the opportunity to go up and study that arm and that hand. And I'm 6'3", and that hand, because of the angle that it was, the arm coming down, I knew that person that I was going to be being welcomed by was taller than me. And I remember his forearms were strong. And the first thing that came to my mind was maybe he was a farmer or a construction worker or now perhaps a carpenter because his arms were really strong because of the way that person must have used them. Well, I remember his hands were bigger than mine and they were stronger than mine. So, which told me that he had to have worked, some kind of heavy work in order to get strong hands like that. And after studying it, I was told to take the hand and come with him. I will never forget that voice. It was a voice that I've heard before. I knew that voice because it was so very, very familiar to me. And I remember also the person that took me, my guardian angel is what I call him. I recognized his voice too. And it's a voice that I will never forget. When I reached up to take the hand started to pull back through the cloud. And I tried to grab it a second time. And the hand disappeared. And the words that came through the cloud was, "It is not yet your time. You have more things yet to do." And for 40 years, I've heard those words. For 40 years, I wondered why I was coming back, why I was being sent back. I did not want to come back. Being honest, I wanted that hand more than I'd ever wanted a hand before because of the energy. I got this close, that close to the hands, and I felt energy coming through that hand that I had never felt before. And the only way I can best describe that is if you've ever done something and you got the chill and it just kind of went through your body, you go, whoa, that felt strange. Well, this was a chill, but it was a radiating chill that went through my entire body. And it was an acceptance that I had never felt before. I always have believed in Jesus Christ, I was not a very good follower before that, but I never lost faith that there was a person like that. And when I was sent back, they were wheeling me out of the room with a sheet over my head, and I had a death certificate on my chest. And as I came back, I saw the doctor over taking his scrubs off and washing his hands, and he was in the most stressful situation because he was going to have to go out and tell my wife that he had lost her husband in a very simple operation, or what he thought was a very simple operation. The anguish that he went through was unbelievable. And when the orderly that was pushing me out of the room when they pronounced me dead laid his clipboard on my chest, he saw movement. And he called over to the doctor and told the doctor to come over, and he needed to see what was going on. And for 3 days, I was put in the ICU and was observed. The doctor wasn't going to let me out of sight for a little while. And he kept coming up and asking questions. Why was you all over the table when we were wheeling you out? And what I told him was there was a war going on in my body. The war was I didn't want to come back. I wanted to feel what I felt and to stay there and to experience it even more. And for 3 days, I felt total peace. And I don't know if you've ever felt total peace before, but it is the most incredible feeling. No anxiety, nothing bothered me. I knew that everything was okay and I was in somebody else's hands. After 3 days being in intensive care, I walked out of the hospital. Just walked out. Well, I was scheduled to be back in Jackson Hole because I had an assignment over there that I had to fulfill. And my wife loaded up all the kids. She would not let me leave town without her. And she went over there with me for a solid month and just basically just hung on to me. That was the first time that I actually told my wife that I loved her. And she didn't know how to take it because she'd never heard me tell her that before. And then when she saw me tell my kids that I loved them, she started crying because it wasn't something that ever came out of my mouth. I learned a few things. I learned how to observe people and to be able to look at their hearts and know their hearts and try to understand where they're coming from. Now, and I also learned that I had to learn how to listen to my guardian angel's voice. That voice is so strong. And if you allow yourself to listen to that voice, you can do miracles. And I'm not talking miracles in making money. That you can make miracles in helping other people feel good and giving them hope. It took me 40 years to open up about this. I'm just a normal guy. I've been retired now 20 years. And 4 years ago, I was prompted to tell my story, a story I did not want to tell, and I fought it. I did not want to tell it because it was so sacred to me. I didn't want to tell anybody about it. In fact, my wife is the only one that knew a lot about it. She didn't know everything about what happened to me. She knew the most. My kids knew virtually nothing. And when I told my story, my kids says, "Well, that's why that's the way you are." And even though it was one of the hardest things I had to do, it was one of the best things I could have done for my family, is telling them the things that I had experienced.